Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a big one, another solo album review. I'm going to be talking about the newest project from Tyler, the Creator, Call Me If You Get Lost. So, the last time I reviewed Tyler, the Creator, it did not go very well. And that does kind of bug me, because I feel like I grasped the emotional truths and reality that Igor was trying to explore in the messy breakup narrative. As I said in the review, I got the appeal. I understood why so many people loved that album, but there were more than enough odd choices in mixing and production and vocal delivery that kept me a bit at a distance from it. Not that I think it's bad, I still think the album's really smart, heartfelt, and really well composed, more that it just wasn't for me in some points of execution. A point of complicated nuance that apparently missed some folks who just go to the scores and start whinging. But you know, that kind of is the truth about Tyler, the Creator, throughout his entire career. He doesn't make easy albums in any capacity, which led a lot of folks to proclaim him as a disingenuous troll a lot of times. I haven't forgotten a lot of the utterly rotten Flower Boy discourse in 2017, which was extremely revealing of how critics approach queer identity and discovery that might be adjacent to the norm, and the fact that Tyler, the Creator, doesn't shy away from his coarser edges gives his work a lot of messy power in both the darkness and the light. Now granted, when it gets this personal and this messy, it's a fair expectation that it doesn't always work for everyone, and said edges and odd production choices, they don't always click. It became an issue on Cherry Bomb for a lot of folks, and at least to me, it was also somewhat true with Igor. And you know, even going back to that project a few years later, the blocky synth integration, the questionable mix balance, especially in the guitars, and some of the awkward guest choices have never connected with me the way that they have for so many. Art's like that, folks. It happens. Don't take it that personally. But since Igor, you know, I've liked a lot of what Tyler has been doing on his guest verses, and while I am going into this project mostly cold, I was really excited to see what sort of genre-breaking music he would pull out this time. I did find it a little bit funny that for some of Tyler's younger listeners, they were thrown by elements of the project that were reportedly inspired by the Gangsta Grillz mixtapes of the 2000s, but given the current wave of 2000s revivalism, it wasn't all that much of a surprise for me, and rap music has been integrating radio passages and segments for decades now. It also gave me the impression that this could be a real curveball in comparison with his entire catalog, so how is it? Well, as some of you might be able to tell, this review is a bit later than even I would have liked. Part of that, I was working on my mid-year list, a little time spent out of town on vacation, a minor social media firestorm that resulted in a Forbes article, but this was also a very interesting listening experience, and I wanted to give this album a little bit more time to really breathe for me. This is an album that is designed for relaxation, and I kind of wanted to be properly relaxed in order to take it in. And when you factor in the emotional density that is lurking just beneath the surface, what might seem as Tyler, the Creator's most accessible, or dare I say, fun album in his entire career, does have a fair bit more going on with it, and I really want to make sure I picked up on the details before I made this review. And the first thing I want to highlight is that it feels as much of a passion project as anything else he's ever released. It'll wind up likely more commercially successful due to the style and some of the content, but it also has the feel of someone realizing a childhood ambition, the kind of kid who grew up on Gangsta Grillz with DJ Drama finally getting to make one of his own, albeit filtered through his own offbeat, tangled sensibilities, where there's as much appreciation for Lil Wayne's dedication to as there might be for Lil Brother's separate but equal, and of course, Pharrell's in my mind the prequel. And that did leave me with some concerns going into this project, as I already mentioned, because I also grew up with that era of mixtapes, and for as often as the free-flowing, sample-everything, careening energy could be a lot of fun, it also did kind of lead to a slush pile of questionable mixing, projects that drag in awkward places, and some guest collaborations that could be very hit and miss. And Tyler recreates that full experience almost to a T. As such, if the album feels a little bit lumpy and misshapen in patches, well, you can explain it both by the format and it being Tyler, but it doesn't make some moments any less exasperating, at least for me. But I do want to address something I saw crop up online around some of the lyrical themes of this album. We're actually going to start more here, and that sparked some ugly discourse. The fact that Tyler the Creator is getting a lot more comfortable flexing his wealth and success. Something that, if you've been paying attention to his guest verses, it has been reflected a shift in his content, even sparking some very real animosity towards the kids who are taking a bit more of an anti-capitalist streak, especially online these days. Now, I find it very telling that Tyler, of all people, is getting this criticism, and even that he may have foreseen some of it coming, it never seems to be brought up amidst the slurry of mainstream rap and trap that wallows in this territory, and somehow I always wind up seeming like the killjoy when I point out the notes where it doesn't work for me. Not even that it's bad, it just doesn't resonate. But for Tyler, I get why some folks might react negatively, especially when he starts asking why pay taxes when his community sees no real benefits, or then complains about folks who criticize him who don't make the same amount of money. Moving beyond the white fans who always tend to give the whole black capitalist movement the side eye, where it's a lot less about the capitalism that's the problem, to me it reflects the fact that Tyler the Creator's kind of weird. He built his kinship and fan base among other internet weirdos. To see him go towards more conventional, but also potentially less relatable subject matter might feel a bit dicey, even alienating. And it especially manifests with his disgust at social media that only ever seems to grasp the surface and never dig deeper into what he's actually saying. Highlighted the most on Manifesto with a blunt but very effective verse from Domogenesis, but also how Tyler's messy past does not fit cleanly into any social justice narrative, and he's also very conscious of his platform and potentially screwing up the message, and how mainstream society still isn't really prepared to grapple with his open sexuality as a black man. And what I think gets missed is how painfully self-aware Tyler is of still being a little on the outside with more than just wealth and queerness. You can hear that emotional balancing act that comes with the awkwardness of bragging when he still feels that he doesn't quite align with a lot of his peers, especially in terms of his taste, but he also kind of wants to take pride in doing things his own warped way and finding real commercial success and even some comfort in it. I think Tyler puts a lot more weight in what wealth represents and can do for him, rather than just stacking cash and flexing in and of itself. And even then, while it does help remove some barriers, it doesn't get rid of all of them, which exposes some very human scenes where Tyler the Creator still struggles to connect and build more relationships. There's a great poignant line on Sweet I Thought You Wanted to Dance where he says, "I'm 25 up, but I can't buy your choice." And I don't know, at least to me, that felt extremely relatable, especially for someone who has struggled to connect with Tyler's journeys at points, but that struggle to, while you're succeeding in the system, but can't connect with more people outside of it, that resonates. That being said, as much as I find the storytelling between the lines of the relationship that he wanted never really clicking across the subtext of the album before becoming bluntly real on WILSHIRE, I'm also not going to say that all the flexing even works for me, and it ties into both incidental details and the broader album structure. I might personally prefer the cosmopolitan side of Tyler the Creator, where he speaks more about travel, seeing more of the world, getting out of his bubble, and I like how well his taste can span opulence, but also remain a little bit more grounded. His bunny hop nicknames from his skateboarding, it's all over this album, and I like his complaint of not being able to mount a proper bike rack on his Rolls Royce on Lemonhead. But okay, let's not act like there are plenty of moments where it is just bragging, but with different brand names, where Juggernaut features Lil Uzi Vert and it doesn't sound remotely out of place, where even if A$AP Rocky ghosted Tyler for some reason, and that's the reason he's not on the project, A$AP Rocky kind of would make sense to be here. But it goes further into the more intriguing new nickname that Tyler the Creator is now using, Tyler Baudelaire, of which you can immediately draw a parallel to the French poet Charles Baudelaire, who was known in the 1800s for writing poetry that picked up a reputation for some scandalous romanticism, particularly in writing around sex and death, and a belief that art's expression should be independent of conventional morality, which was kind of controversial both then and now. In other words, it's not a surprise at all, especially given the backlash that Baudelaire saw at the time, that Tyler would see a kinship in terms of a romantic spirit who routinely steps out of the bounds of said conventional morality and sees backlash for it in order to find a more raw form of beauty. Very Oscar Wilde here too. And there are other parallels I find interesting as well. Both Baudelaire and Tyler try to hold up a mirror to their audiences in vices they refuse to admit publicly but but still judge him for. The framing of women in their work with more complexity than oft afforded at the time or in their genre, all the dandyism. And yet as their careers have continued, a fondness for a certain brand of aristocracy that would let them do as they please and also entrench their station within the power structure. Baudelaire was a fan of de Maistre, Tyler references Drake and Jay-Z. But it also fills in the arc of the album. As much as Tyler the Creator reflexively uses his wealth to plug in his depression and his grief and openly acknowledge that it's not really giving him full happiness, he's not going to cede that wealth. As after the Confessions of Wilshire, he's back on the road on safari. And look, I get ending the album on a brighter, maybe even more optimistic note, but it feels a little shallower than it should, feeling like after that chapter in his life, he's just moving on, gotta keep moving, and it doesn't quite have that thematic gut punch that Flower Boy and Igor had, at least for the closing bits. But this is also where we have to pivot back to how this is constructed. It's built with all the touch points of a summertime mixtape. It's not surprising that it's supposed to be a little more thematically lightweight and breezy. And thus, if this brand of flexing and summertime musings are your thing, I get how it's gonna work, even in those heavier details. And it's not hard to see a very loose parallel to what Frank Ocean did with Blonde as another summertime album in 2016, where the texture of the experience is as important as the content, if not even a little more so. And yet, like with Igor, while there are more choices here that work for me on a musical level, there was also a fair few rougher edges that didn't really click. Some of it is that mixtape stylism. I hate to say it, but some of the messy bass mixing and inconsistent vocal mastering could get really exasperating. And while there's more of an excuse for it this time, it doesn't always hit as well as I was hoping. But another part of it is that Tyler is a much better rapper than he is a singer. So when the album pitches his voice and he starts crooning a little more, like with Igor, it doesn't quite work for me. Especially in some of the moments of the Lover's Rock, it can feel a little bit chintzy. That's why the first half of the album that leans more into the ramshackle grooves have more resonance. Even if the bass really swamps out CORSO, the groove and bounce off that keyboard, those swells, it's magnetic. As are the grimy blasts of synth horns and chalky percussion on Lemonhead. That song's really retro. And even the unstable rumbles and tape reel sputters of Lumberjack, as well as some of the more luxurious sample flips of What's Your Name with YoungBoy Never Broke Again and Ty Dolla $ign, and Hot Wind Blows with Lil Wayne stepping up in spades as all the whistles will splash off the flutes and the keys, hitting a really potent, relaxed vibe there. But then you get to that medium spot on cuts like Massa, the oily wells of Manifesto, and the meandering, watery roughness of Wilshire. But then we get the extended, sweet, I Thought You Wanted to Dance, especially on the second half, where those air horns and those ad-libs, they feel a little bit forced to mesh with the vibe, or how even Rise and Juggernaut feel increasingly clunky, although I do think the latter will go off insanely well at any sort of festival, or how Safari tries to capture that luxurious vibe to end things off with the synth horns that are slipping off key, and it just does not stick the landing for me, especially dropping an ableist slur in the second verse. It's just a real dud to close out the album. And you know, that is the thing that has me so conflicted with Call Me If You Get Lost, because again, I do like this album. Hell, I think I might like it more than Igor in terms of the instrumental tones that have some of that nostalgic pull back to that age, but also well executed, with a diversity and looseness that gives this a lot of charm, even if you didn't grow up with Gangsta Grillz. But every time I want to call this a great album, there will be swerves in the production that kind of frustrate me, a commitment to nostalgia that doesn't always pay the highest dividends that it should, and the niggling feeling that this is a project at odds with itself thematically in so many places, second-guessing its own emotional through lines, and not just in the pursuit of greater nuance. And you know, even though I might have mentioned the word before, I don't like calling Tyler albums messy, because, you know, even on Cherry Bomb, there were so many choices that felt deliberate, so even now he might say that album was shifty, he did know what he was doing, and that's just as true here. It's just more scattered, one that works better if you just let it wash over you, and pick up some of the clever but aching poetry as you ride the vibes. Now, I personally still think Flower Boy is his best in terms of compositional beauty and how revelatory it felt, but this is not that far behind, and that's why I'm giving it an extremely strong 7 out of 10, but my recommendation comes with the advice you need to take some time with this one, and it's likely going to go nuts live, and I'm not sure the current mix of the album elevates it to that potency, Although if I go see him live, I would be happy to be wrong. That being said, it's also a really damn solid slice of genre-bending music that's perfect for the summer, and even if it feels a little loose at the seams, still very much worth experiencing. Give this a chance. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to see the score and just lose their shit as per usual. Folks, this is an album with layers. It's more complicated. There is some resonance for me. I just wish it was more consistent. But if you've got comments about that, have fun down there below. And beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get an album on my schedule so I can talk about it more, either here in a solo review or on the Pulse, link to my Patreon is right over there. Please, once again, don't feel obligated to do so. Tough times, I get it. But hey, if you want to, options available. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.